Okay, I think we get started, and as people can still hopefully find seats. I really want to welcome you to Directors Dialogue. This is our virtual and in-person conversation with visionary leaders of science, education, and industry. These dialogues are designed to offer insight and perspectives on the emerging opportunities, challenges, and trends in biomedical science and technology. Our guests share their most meaningful experiences and observations. They tell us what excites them and also what concerns them about the present and future of bioscience, and describe innovation that could dramatically affect the future of human health. I'm so pleased to have you today here in the auditorium of the Whitehead Institute, and there are also quite a few people joining us online. And regardless of where you're joining us from, you're part of the conversation. So you can, if you're online, you can submit your questions. And if you're here, we will hand you a microphone later on as the conversation concludes. Before we want to, I start the conversation today, I want to acknowledge a group of special friends of the Whitehead Institute, and those are our Whitehead alums. These are our former graduate students, postdocs, fellows, and visiting scientists who are now playing significant roles at academic research centers and life science companies all over the world. We're very pleased when our alums remain connected with the Whitehead community, and you may see some, they wear actually a special tag, so you know who is an alum. So now let me introduce our special speaker of tonight. It's a real pleasure to introduce Uli Stilz. He is an accomplished scientist, an innovative biotech leader, and he's presently the vice president of Novo Nordisk and the leader of the company's Bio-Innovation Hub based here in Cambridge. The Novo Nordisk Bio-Innovation Hub functions as a cross-functional R&D unit focused on external innovation. Uli leads a team that establishes new partnership models with biotech companies, venture capital firms, university research centers such as ours, and other organizations across the life science ecosystem. And we have a really vibrant ecosystem here, and that attracted this Bio-Innovation Hub to Cambridge in the first place. These innovative collaborations create novel therapies and technologies to help people living with prevalent cardiometabolic diseases like diabetes, and also those with rare endocrine and blood disorders. How has one come to lead a creation and implementation of such exciting partnerships? Here's what we know about Uli. He earned his master's degree in organic chemistry at the ETH Zurich and a PhD from the Max Planck Institute of Biochemistry. Next, he completed postdoctoral studies at Caltech before joining the German life science company Höchst. And from here, Uli joined Sanofi, where over a period of 20 years, he contributed to more than 60 preclinical and clinical drug candidates for cardiometabolic, immunology, and oncology therapeutics. From 2010 to 2014, Uli joined a newly established innovation unit with Sanofi with a focus on diabetes research, including a mix of internal research and external collaborations. In 2014, Uli joined Novo Nordisk in Copenhagen, and in 2019 came here to create and lead Novo Nordisk Bio-Innovation Hub. In addition to all of this, Uli has served as an adjunct professor at the University of Frankfurt, as president of the European Federation of Medicine and Chemistry, as an editorial board member of multiple peer-reviewed journals, and as a member of the scientific advisory boards of several North American and European organizations. We are so grateful to have him here today. And I'm excited to hear about his work that he and his colleagues and collaborators are doing. And we also want to discuss today, especially academic industry partnerships. As we all know, chronic diseases such as diabetes and other cardiometabolic conditions are increasing around the globe. These diseases are complex, affecting the entire organism and not just one type of cell or one organ. Uli will tell us about specific health issues that Novo prioritizes, how Novo Nordisk in Innovation Biohub will address these as a collaborative, and the partners they have already engaged. And with that, I would like to welcome Uli to the podium because he will show us a few slides before we start our conversation. Welcome, Uli.
Thank you. Ruth, thank you very much for the kind introduction, for inviting me here. It's a real pleasure to be back at the Whitehead Institute and spend time with you this evening. I just wanted to give you a really, really brief snapshot what the Bio-Innovation Hub is, what motivates us and what brought us here, and then spend most of the time on the dialogue and, of course, all the questions you may have. So I want... I wanted to start with this slide, which is very at the center of Novo Nordisk and what the Novo Nordisk purpose is to help and drive change for people living with chronic diseases. And you see a few numbers here, which I think also gives us an impression of the dimension of the challenge to help these people and how many are impacted in diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular and other conditions, for instance, chronic kidney disease. These are complex diseases, and Ruth talked about it. Because we want to continue to innovate, that was driving us to come here to Boston, to Kendall Square, into this community, to then start innovating together with you. And in many ways, Kendall Square is one of the most innovative ecosystems on the planet. Some would even say the most innovative square mile, right? If you go 3 blocks from here, there's a beautiful sign. At the same time, when we came here, now soon 6 years ago, there was actually very little happening in terms of translating cardiometabolic ideas into new treatment options. And that motivated us coming here because we felt there must be so much scientific know-how and expertise which would enable us together to go on a journey together to innovate and help finding new solutions, next generation therapeutic options for the many people here on this slide which live with those conditions and which are looking for improved therapeutic options. And so what we want, and that's why we came here, we wanted to work with all the innovators in this ecosystem. At the same time, we wanted to bring our cardiometabolic expertise, and that's why we have built the Bio-Innovation Hub as a team, a cross-functional team sitting just 2 blocks from here, which is deeply focused on cardiometabolic expertise, and then brings this into these communities and to jointly explore new science, new frontiers, and co-create new ideas to, at the end, lift the innovation in the cardiometabolic space. Now I want to show you on one slide a few things what we have done. That's where we started. We started on the other side of the street at MIT with a partnership with Bob Langer with a specific question, and I can talk about this later a little bit more. And then next we came to the Whitehead. 2 very different collaborations with different purposes, but that was our entry point in terms of finding a footing here around 2017, 2018. So Whitehead collaboration started very, very basic science, but then led, as we learned and advanced, led to a collaboration with DuPont with the hopes that we actually can find transformative new treatments for diabetes. With a specific focus, can we find disease modifiers we have so far not been able to find over 100 years of research? Can we slow down, maybe stop, disease progression for diabetic patients? And then it became a white canvas. And now I'll show you with one click what we actually have been painting on the canvas. That's what we have done since we are here. So we have established more one-on-one partnerships, like, with Abroad, with Coro on the biotech side. We have tapped into whole ecosystems. So with Flagship, we were very deliberate to create a framework. How can we work with this whole ecosystem? And that took us a while to kind of think about how this can work. And then we tapped into more dispersed ecosystems like with Lab Central, or more recently MPC Biolabs on the West Coast. And then finally, we started to create our own ecosystems with academic institutions, teaching hospitals, and partners like Evotech. How can we help translate basic science and help this translational journey by putting the right tools and means in place to progress and stepwise de-risk and complement what you know in academia with what we believe is actually needed to, at the end, validate new biology and actually get to molecules which at the end can be tested in humans whether they can provide benefit. So that's our journey. I stop here, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So maybe let's just jump in because you had all kinds of different collaborations. But sort of do you see that academic research at a very early stage can contribute to biotech innovation? And at that stage, what are the most important parts of and valuable aspects of these collaborations? Because that was, I think, some of the early ones when you showed it.
I think, Ruth, I would like to start this with a comment that, I fundamentally believe that academia is the starting foundation for all what we do in life science, in biopharma, where a curiosity-driven research drives new insights. Oftentimes, I felt like when I was in an academic environment, it gets really interesting when the experiment turns out differently than what we planned. And I think academia is uniquely positioned to then follow through and go on a discovery journey to open completely new doors. So I think from this perspective, most, if not all, biopharma has been, based on discoveries which came out of academia. And I would say in the US particular, of course, this was complemented by an evolving and capital market which supported this startup creation. So that actually companies which were created here, not only based on US science, but also European science has been a source of creating companies here in the US environment because the capital market is much more supportive here in the US than in other geographies. Then on the other hand, the life science company, pharma companies, and biotech companies, they bring unique complementary capabilities. This question, how do I really validate that something is robust, that the biology can potentially translate, how to find a molecule which has all this dimension of properties needed in a molecule to actually safely bring it to humans. And then when we have gotten to this point, how to actually get to a proof point. Mm-hmm. And especially, in the diseases I showed you here, the chronic diseases, these are very long, oftentimes thousands, tens of thousands of patients who have to be studied in clinical studies to get to an outcome result. So that, I think, is where the public sector can really work with, the private with the public sector crosstalk in terms of then help those ideas to come to people living with those conditions.
So for those of you who don't know, but there was a collaboration which started actually really, really early in 2018 with Novo, Nordisk, and Rudolf Jenisch and Rick Young, and you actually placed a scientist into the laboratory, and so and then that led to some of the discoveries and many years later, DuPont, as you described. So, is that something that you're doing? Is that a good method? Is that a good way of really enforcing the collaborations?
I think yes, Ruth, and maybe I describe it a little bit more broadly because I think there is not one partnership and one partnership framework, but I think this notion of being experimental. Mm-hmm. an experiment. So I take it a little bit back, maybe 10 years, around 2013, 2014. We were thinking how to interact with academia, and we were mostly coming from the question, how can we nurture talent? And so we started partnerships with both Oxford and then later Karolinska to ask those institutions come up with exciting research proposals, and then young talent around the world could apply for the fellowships we provided. And so that was really meant to train young scientists in learning something new. But it also established a deep connectivity between Oxford and Novo Nordisk and also Karolinska. And it led to, in Oxford, in this dialogue with the leadership in Oxford, Sir John Bell and others, to that we later on created actually a research center on Oxford campus right next to the Big Data Institute to then dive deep into human genetics. Something Novo at this point in time didn't feel so important because the notion was to understand insulin and GLP-1, human genetics is not so critical, but now we are so happy that we have it because human genetics are really critical. And I describe it a little bit lengthy like this because some of those things are oftentimes not linear, right? Because things evolve in dialogues and ideas, then jointly get created, which leads to something which is then really later important. Then around 2015 to 2016, we felt, we also want to learn and get to outcomes with academia. And then I soon come to your question. And so our notion was, okay, we have all these academic collaborations, but they are not really very productive. We don't get the outcomes we would like to see as an industrial organization. So then the discussion was in Novo Nordisk, we actually have to force it, right? Now the industrial machinery needs to get into this. Let's define milestones, outcomes, and then we forced this into these academic institutions, believing this will solve the equation. But at the same time, we did not commit Novo Nordisk resources. So we hoped that by asking academia to be more process and outcome focused, we would get better results. And what we dreamed of would be the best of all worlds, in some way turned almost out like the worst of all worlds, because what academia was really good at, we kind of took away from them by forcing them for outcomes, and we didn't bring in what we were good at. So from this, we then learned, and then, we started, when we came here, a partnership with Bob Langer, and on the question, we had been working on the question, could we make insulin orally available? Right? This has to be injected. Could there be an oral product? And we found a solution for a formulation which enabled about a bioavailability orally of insulin of 1%. That was a breakthrough, right? Because so far that was not possible. At the same time, we over time realized insulin and, on the 1% bioavailability, that's not really scalable, right? Because 99% becomes, in a way, expensive protein food. And so we were asking the question, could we actually make a real quantum jump here? Could we get to double-digit bioavailabilities? It was clear that needed something completely different. So we started to talk to Bob on the other side of the street. Could we design devices? And could we make, basically solid insulin as a needle and inject it into the stomach with a device? So that became a fascinating collaboration. And it worked not only because Bob's lab was very experimental and designed a lot of new prototypes, but because we allocated a significant team in Copenhagen supporting it with prototyping. And so this became our first collaboration where we had a real big team in Novo Nordisk working with an academic partner. And it delivered fantastic publications, a very broad patent portfolio, and at the end, a device which went into clinical studies and actually showed quite promising bioavailability. So a really successful collaboration. And here, of course, we had milestones and outcomes, but we supported the academic environment with significant resources and infrastructure. And now I come to your question with the Whitehead. With the Whitehead, we took a completely different approach, right? What we learned that it's not so good to push milestones into academia. That's what we try to do here. So we saw Rick and Udi and I think on MIT, Phil Sharp and Linda Griffiths became part of a team with this question where we saw breakthrough research happening here, mostly in the cancer research area about how genes are regulated and this paradigm of condensate formation, which in my mind was very different than what I learned in textbooks, how genes are regulated. So something new is happening here. And can we learn from this? And can we engage with this? And so we started to hypothesize maybe this could also be important not only in cancer, but in diabetes. But we knew very little about it. And so we started to create a framework to learn from each other, where the Whitehead and the colleagues on the MIT side brought the insight about gene regulation, condensate biology. And we inserted a scientist here which brought the diabetes know-how. And so there was a two-way learning in a partnership where we actually defined it as really blue sky. We did not define any milestones. We had wonderful meetings up here and learned from each other. And important, I think important publications and insights, which then later led to our conviction this could be ready now to start a drug discovery journey. And then we lifted it out of the Whitehead and gave it to DuPont, which I think was founded around the same time we started our academic collaboration. So I think that's a beautiful, different example of a very successful collaboration. So maybe I pause here on this question.
No, I was just sort of wondering of, having, on the one hand, having somebody from Novo in a laboratory environment and how the goals of academic scientists and obviously biopharma scientists may really diverge. What they're at the end, with the even what is called success, and so how is that best managed? Because that will help the collaborations when both feel like they can achieve their goals, right?
Yes, I think, Ruth, and we can also like to speak a little bit more about what's important in terms of forming new partnerships, right? Where I also always feel, it's really important to come together and then brainstorm and then develop a joint vision, right? What is it in 3 or 5 years from now when we come together and see what we have done that we all smile, right? Because we feel like, we were on a journey together. The results may not exactly be what we anticipated, but that it was under a bigger umbrella of a vision. And so I don't think that is a real barrier between academia and industry to agree on, what would good look like, right? How can we create a transformative new insight which could lead to a new, which could life make better for many living with, serious conditions where they hope for improvement. But at the same time, there are very different cultures in academia and in industry, and how to bring those two pieces together in a productive way. And I tried to describe that we experimented with different ways, and we found angles which we felt were very productive, and we found angles which we felt like, that is not really successful. Let's move away from it. So, but I would say in academia, very curiosity-driven, there is like a push, right? Okay, you academic researchers also want to find an application. If you have a discovery, I think many in academia also would like to see, can this be applied somewhere? But in the basic lab, it may not always be so clear where this application could be. That is where I think there can be really a push from the academic side. Here's a discovery, and from the industry side, a pull. We have ideas where this could be applied, and how could this address an unmet need, which is not really served today, which we have a pretty good understanding. So that's one piece, right? Is push and pull. As the other part is. Academia has this really deeply curiosity-driven insights and experimental culture. And that is not so easy to have in the same way in a large corporation for many reasons, right? And one of them is that we work in a highly, highly regulated environment because everything we do comes to people and humans, so it has to be always the same. It has to be safe. It has to be reliable. So this whole environment has to be really, really process-driven. And it's very hard in a large organization to completely dissociate. It's a very process-driven late stage and quality mindset from the early stage. So there's a different culture, which has to be a culture of reliability and making it very robust. But that's not always very experimental. And so I think that's where academia can also help industry on the very front side of research to kind of find the right balance, because industry needs this experimental. Right? The new discovery journey can never be, if we know already that where the journey is and can make a linear line, then it's probably not very innovative. And so I think there is a really productive crosstalk between academia and industry.
So we are training the next generation of academic scientists, but also biopharma scientists, right? And so often we are told that we're not doing a good job in educating the next generation of people who want to go into biopharma. And so do you have suggestions, or do you think, no, they can all learn this when they come into the company? Or what do you think? Because I could imagine there are quite a few graduate students here who are, and by now it's actually, I think 50% of MIT graduate students, at least in the first year, I know, say, I'm interested in going into industry, biotech. So are we doing a good job? How could we do a better job in training that next generation?
It's a good question, Ruth, right? And I think, I was in different academic institutions for 10 years, and then I felt like I know a lot. And when I came to industry, I realized, there's so much more to be learned. So I don't think, scientific talent coming out of academic institutions need to know everything, but it's a learning journey, and that's, I think, really important. What I would think a foundation always is to be really, really well trained in one discipline and understand how to ask big questions, how to experimentally approach it, and be really deeply curious, how to really learn about curiosity-driven research and learn on this journey also how to do independent research. That, I think, is a really important foundation. Then I think, of course, also today, I believe many insights and progress in science happens between disciplines. And I don't think an individual scientist can know all of it, but to know enough about your neighbor disciplines that you actually can communicate. And then that you can also start to collaborate and understand the other side and keep learning about also other disciplines. So in some way become multilingual, but also learns the skills how to work with others, right? And kind of in a team environment. And that, I think, is a good skill, because that is really important also in industry, because drug discovery is a team sport. So many disciplines and capabilities have to come together. So I think that's also something you can foster in an academic environment, to learn to collaborate across boundaries. And then I think important is also to keep this open mind and asking questions and bring out the expertise of others, right? When you go to industry, and especially when you're in a leadership position, then most important over time to learn that you cannot be the best expert.
In everything.
In everything. No, it's actually much better to have much smarter people working with you than you are yourself, and learn from them.
Same in the lab.
Right? And then actually create an environment where actually the best can come out of individuals that they can contribute, and how to synthesize different insights into a kind of a joint learning. So I think for leaders really to make sure that, my job in a way is, okay, how to make sure that people argue with each other, and how do I create a culture where people feel comfortable arguing with each other, but about the topic, not about the person. Right? So I think these are maybe all things which are important, but then in an industrial environment, important to find a mentor and learn from others when you start. But I would not expect people who come need to know everything. what I've seen a little bit, I don't know how much this is here as a case. In Europe, I've seen a little bit, okay, people also need to know about economics and business and all of this as natural scientists when they leave academia. I'm not convinced this is required because that can all be learned in an industrial setting. So I would rather, become a really, really good scientist and then from there build on it and learn more skills over time.
That's very interesting. I mean, that comes back to some extent to the incentive structure. And that is still the incentive structure of academic science still has some problems with collaborations. It is getting a lot better.
Yeah.
So I think that is very, a very interesting point.
But in industry, it's of course important. You need to be able to work with everybody, right? You can have your preferences, right? But you need to be able to work across because all the disciplines at the end are needed for a joint success.
So you're trying to tackle some of the biggest question in health is at the moment we don't actually have answers. And so do you think that you are getting in the environment here, you are getting the right collaborators, or are there possibilities for collaborators beyond what sort of the academics, biological culture can provide to you?
Yeah, I think, of course, we came here and I showed you on this one slide, we started to paint on the canvas, but of course there's a lot more, right? So there's two components now. We have a number of really exciting partnerships where we want to see outcomes and progress. So that's important. But then innovation never stops, right? There continues to be new things. And then one question can be, okay, how do we find new partners, or how do you find industrial partners? I think here this ecosystem is unique because it's so easy to bump into people, right? So walking up and down the street, whenever I walk up and down the street, I bump into people. And some I know, and some I get introduced to. And then out of these discussions, oftentimes new dialogues happen, and that can be a starting point of a new engagement, collaboration. So I can give you one example, which I think is a beautiful example. It's 2 or 3 years back. Dr. Josef Lohes, MGH, and Brigitte Wagner at Das Abroad, they reached out to me and my team because they had a question. They had a molecule with a nice pharmacology very early, and they actually wanted only to consult with us. They wanted to get our industrial view what to do next. And so we were sitting at Abroad for an hour and discussed this. And then we were standing up and left the room. And I think while walking out, I said to Jose, maybe we could actually do something together. And that then turned into a really, intense dialogue over a year. Not really focused, but it led to that we developed a joint plan. How can we work together across MGH and Abroad and us to dive much deeper in diabetes disease biology? With all what we have now in human genetics, can we get closer to the root cause of diabetes? And so it became the crystallization point for the partnership we have now with Abroad. And so I think all of you, if you think about, you want to work with an industrial partner, I think it's good to be a little bit deliberate, right? Because you can do your diligence, what company is having what focus. So to come to us with an oncology question is maybe not the first partner to go to. There may be others. But if you have a question about diabetes, obesity, then it's natural to, maybe stop by or send us an SMS or a LinkedIn note or whatever it is for a dialogue. And then I think it's this, not really formalized interaction to get a sense for, is there a joint interest? And can we get to a joint vision of what would be really exciting to do together? So as a starting point. And from there, when we have this, really build energy for it. So I think important, what I've seen in all partnership, that it's also important to have a champion on both sides. Because putting things together, there's always many things which could go wrong. So to have a champion on both sides, which helps, if something gets a little bit stalled, to resolve it. But then for us, important also to say is complementarity. So when we work with a partner, both in academia but also on the industrial side with biotech companies, we want to know that we can contribute something. Expertise, know-how, capabilities. If that's not the case, we believe we should not be the owner of this piece of science. We don't want to be investors, right? We want to really be scientific contributors. That's for us. Because if we cannot do this, we feel somebody else should own this piece of science and bring it forward, because then there is more expertise and likelihood of success is higher. And so at the same time, we look for our partners, what do they know and what do they bring which is complementary to what we know. And so if this is in place, then we get into this space of negotiating. And that's interesting, and Rick knows because we talked about this many times. And it's not only science, right? Sometimes we believe, we get excited about science, and that is a wonderful journey to a productive collaboration. No, it's always these two dimensions. There needs to be scientific excitement, and we need to be able on the business side. On the business side, also create a win-win situation, and to be sometimes really creative on the business side, what could be a business framework where both parties can also benefit. And that's often underestimated and can lead to very lengthy negotiations, where I feel like, it's actually important to be creative also on the business side and not have these endless battles I have seen. Here is the cake with 100%, and who gets 49% of the cake and who gets 51%. And they're going up and down for weeks, for months, for half a year, for 3/4 of a year, or longer to negotiate about this. Instead of kind of sitting together and say, how can we actually be creative and turn this cake of 100% into a cake of 105%? And then it doesn't matter who gets 52 and who gets 53. So there is also an art in negotiating. And most important for me, when I think about it, that when I'm on the negotiation table, that I'm not thinking so much about my position, but that I want to understand your position. And then I'm actually able to create this 105% cake. So I think that's actually really important.
So that's an interesting. I was going to ask you about the barriers. So you have your ideas of how to break down barriers or also obstacles, which are often in these negotiations.
It's understanding the other side, where's the other side coming from, what's important for the other side. And oftentimes for the other side, something else is important than for us. Right? Then I can give something here and maybe convince the other side, but that's important for me. So for instance, in an academia industry relationship, I of course know for you publications are critically important, right? So then at the outset, I have to have my mind that any partnership framework with academia, I need to allow publications, also in a timely manner. At the same time, you of course, I think, can have the insight. Intellectual property is really important for us. We cannot commercialize a product if we don't have IP protection. So, then I need to be mindful about what is my process to file IP before I actually publish, and do this in a really rigorous way. So then one of those tension points between academia and industry can actually be taken very easily off the table. I don't think this is actually an issue. But it's good to be mindful what's important for the other side.
So perhaps a final question sort of out in the future before we ask the audience to ask you some questions. So we just, this month, we had Nobel Prizes for microRNA and then also for AI to understand protein structure. And so in your opinion, which new technologies or basic scientific advances do we need?
That, Ruth, is a big question.
Yeah, and I don't. We really need something.
And I give you a few, and then we can, look at this 10 years from now,
Exactly,
what I said today.
exactly.
But I would say, AI is important and here to stay. I did spend last week 4 days at this health meeting in Las Vegas, where there was a convergence of the tech companies and the biopharma industry coming together in one big meeting. And AI was basically, on every second slide. And I was sitting on a panel, AI and drug discovery, and we discussed it very broadly. Okay, well, it's not, one use case. It's important to understand biology, and I think it's crosstalk between, for instance, single-cell sequencing and AI is, in my mind, really important to understand biology at a more system level. It's important how we design next-generation molecules. I also think it will be important how we conduct clinical trials in the future, and it can help us here. But many other use cases, right? From analyzing and reading literature much faster. What are the most important papers? What information do I want to extract where? So I think there will be a very broad impact in many dimensions. And it's not only here to stay, I also think it's accelerating in a significant way. So I think that will be continuously important. I think new paradigms in biology, I talked about condensate biology, now we have a conviction with DuPont and what we have done with you here at the Whitehead, that this can open new doors in terms of understanding the complexity of some diseases, what is derailing in the system, and why didn't we understand it so far. So new paradigms, and that's one paradigm, but I'm sure there are others. I do believe now, we see first treatments and data points, which makes me believe we may be able to slowly start to unlock neurodegenerative diseases, Alzheimer's, first progress being made. So I would hope that more to come here, that now more innovation will flow into this space, which is such a debilitating disease and really important to make progress. And then personally, I have a deep conviction also about genetic medicines, right? So, we have very much focused on proteins and peptides as a company. But at the same time, I know from human genetics that more than 70% of the important targets are actually in the cell. And we have not figured out yet how to get biologics into the cell. So this whole array of genetics, genetic medicine, from siRNA to messenger RNA to epigenetic modulators. Now recently we made this deal with messenger RNA editing. All of this, I feel like, it's how to learn how to play this piano. What tool to use for what problem. And so to unlock biology, which so far is closed, because not everything can be solved with a small molecule. There are problems which are, in my mind, not solvable with a small molecule. So that we, on the molecular side, also diversify and broaden our arsenal of tools. I think that will be important. And then lastly, I would say, that's a few things which are in my mind today now, but I probably myself, I'm most excited about what I don't predict today, right? Because I think we will make, discoveries and then see what they take us to.
Yeah, that's a wonderful way to stop here. And let's take some questions from the audience. And thank you first. This is really, really wonderful. Maybe we'll have some light and we have some questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was a really good talk. I just had a question about, as a leader, because I know it's potentially difficult to prioritize things. And I was wondering, whenever you have such long development cycles for some of these technologies, is it difficult to balance like that scientific curiosity and the excitement of maybe a new discovery that's an improvement on something you're already developing? Like if there's a bit of like difficulty there within development?
Yeah, I think, that's in my mind one of the most difficult questions for any R&D leader. Because in some way it's a system level question, right? There is an existing technology and a new technology is emerging, and how will this pan out and how will this compete? And at what point in time does this become an alternative scenario? And there are so many questions linked to it. And the timeline can be surprisingly long. So now I'll give you an example, antibodies. Right? I think it was 76, Milstein-Köhler Nobel Prize, monoclonal antibodies, really important basic science discovery. But from there until the antibodies made it to a commercially available product was late 90s, early 2000, a very long journey how to find out how to humanize antibodies and all these questions which were so complex. Now you would think, that this was so appealing, this idea, there were small molecules and all of a sudden, peptides, which are more or less small molecules, and all of a sudden there's something new, right? There were antibodies. To go after targets where small molecules cannot really target it. And so you would think everybody in this biopharma industry should be on top of this. But reality was when antibodies then really, really started, basically all the big pharma companies missed the inflection point, right? They were in it and they tried to figure out. And then, in an industrial environment, it's super, super hard to keep something 20 years alive if it's only bleak with problems. And all of a sudden, it happened. The one player who was in it was Roche because they had bought Genentech. But by and large, all the breakthrough happened in biotech, but not in large pharma. And something similar then repeated itself in the antisense, and then as it evolved, the siRNA field, where everybody was in. I was overseeing a nucleotide-based chemistry group in 2000. I managed to defend it for 10 years, and then we closed it down. And then siRNA happened, right? And well, yes, but still, those who made the breakthrough was Alnylam, and it was Ionis on the antisense side, but none of the big pharma, but they all were in it, but then all also didn't get really the inflection point when it happened. So I think that's a really, really complex question. But what I would say for an organization important is you cannot watch it from the distance. That would be my advice. You have to have your feet in it. And maybe if it's only 1 foot. Right? But you have to be in it to see how a field is emerging and at least make small investments to understand where a field is going.
Hi, thanks so much for that. That was really interesting. I'm really, really particularly curious to know what you think about just links between metabolic disease, which is such a focus for Novo Nordisk, as well as connections to other diseases like neurodegenerative disease. Are there opportunities that you particularly are interested in pursuing with your teams, or what do you think are some things on the horizon for you there, particularly with respect to pathogenesis and how these two different conditions relate? And I can elaborate on how they relate, but I think maybe you have ideas about it. Yeah.
Actually, you may have more ideas than I do, because I sense a passion from you. But we study, and you probably know this. We study GLP-1 in a phase 3 study in Alzheimer's, so it will soon read out, and that will be really important to understand this insight. But there's certainly more neuroinflammation. I think that's a really interesting, exciting area of biology.
Question over here.
I want to refer to your cake story. I think it boils down to negotiating contracts. From my experience, it seems like academia are really tough on negotiating contracts. Do you have any advice for them to be flexible because from two weeks it jumps to 4 and 6 months to 1 year? So I think there has to be some flexibility. Any advice for academia on how to negotiate contracts with corporations like yours?
Yeah, I think that's what I meant, right? Okay, how can we be on this side more creative, right? And there are elements of certain economics. I don't think, from at least how I look at it, that this should be so complicated. And then there are the more complicated, more sophisticated question about how do we go about IP. How do we go about exclusivity questions? How do we go about know-how? Then everything has a certain risk profile, right? So something can go wrong. And I think it's just sometimes to resist the temptation to believe, you need to have 5 insurance policies for the most remote probability. Right? So I think as an R&D leader, I sometimes feel, I can help insist that I, take accountability for certain risks, what could happen. But I fundamentally come from the baseline assumption, everybody comes to the table with a really good intent. And so maybe it's not necessarily always to go to the last branch of the tree. Right? But that requires insights on both sides. And I've seen it's on both sides, right? I've seen it in academic tech offices. I have seen it on the industrial side, that there was a real temptation to really go down the last branch of the tree. And sometimes, how can you solve it, right? And what is an interesting one, I've seen negotiations where we wanted to make a really, really small agreement. And it took forever. It took forever because it had not real priority. And I remember a case where I went to my board and said, we negotiate now since a year on this small, and I actually want to do more. I want to make a bigger collaboration. And I was almost sent out of the room, right? Or what on earth is this for an idea? But actually, it's an interesting dynamic which happens then, because it became a more strategic collaboration, the scientific leadership on the other side became interested and became champions. And from there, we could actually solve it quite quickly. So I think you need also on both sides champions who really want it, right? And make sure it happens.
David, do we have online?
Sure. How do you foresee AI changing the drug development pipeline, and how might this differ in academic and industry settings?
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think AI will have an impact on how we understand biology over time. And, it's also a question how we get to data. And, as we get more data, then we continue to learn, the algorithms improve. So there's an iterative cycle. So that's one part, understanding biology. And I would think, that we also can understand it more on a system level, right? Because that's maybe not so easy for a human brain to contemplate. So I think there could be complementarity. At the same time, I also believe what are barriers for AI implementation? It's maybe the most important barrier is actually the scientists, right? If this is not intuitive, they don't really want to engage. So how do we make actually sure that we don't create two worlds, the world of the data scientists and the world of the wet lab scientists, but that we make sure it's integrated, right? And that we learn from each other. So one part is biology, understanding biology, designing molecules. I think, the fastest progress I've seen is on the protein side, designing protein ligands. And that's maybe also because there is a language in those proteins, 20 amino acids, which is maybe more, closer to, natural language processing and models than a small molecule in terms of how we can learn. So I think and the Nobel Prize also went into this direction, right? So that's maybe not a surprise. I would think there can also be learnings about understanding patient subgroups over time, so that and then clinical trial execution could benefit. So maybe that's a few.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
Hi, Uli. So coming back to one of your slides, huge population with diabetes, huge population with obesity. And so my question is, to what extent do you and do maybe Novo think that future development of therapeutics in these areas and maybe higher success rates is going to be driven by better stratifying or better sort of subdividing those populations based on sort of the underlying causes of their specific disease so that we can be more successful.
Yes, and I think that's super important. You know, that's part of what we want to do with abroad, right? From really that human genetics informs us, you know, can we get to subpopulations and then understand better the drivers in those subpopulations over assuming diabetes is one disease. And so I think that's an important component.
Thank you so much. I think we learned about the scientist, the creator of drugs, and also the mensch, Uli Stilz. And with that, I want to thank all the audience, and I want to thank you very much. And I think this was really memorable, and I really greatly enjoyed the conversation. I want to tell all our audience that thank you for joining us. Please visit our website and hear more about the work that goes on at the Whitehead, and please consider to make a gift to support some of our amazing scientists. And with that, good night.